Hello, everyone. Good morning, and welcome to the second annual Purposeful Architecture and Healthcare event. Thank you so much for joining us today. As Corinne mentioned, I'm your host and moderator, Sarah Winters. You may know me from such roles as host of last year's Purposeful event, as well as ZGF's Senior Communications Manager out of our LA office. So last year we gathered in person at the Pacific Design Center. It was a fantastic day of discussion and collaboration. And this year we're coming to you live from all over the greater Los Angeles area. And while we may not be physically together, on behalf of the committee, our panelists, myself, we've been thoughtful and, dare I say, purposeful in our efforts to make sure that this year's virtual gathering is just as relevant and engaging. So today we're going to be talking about accessible care, the shared future of retail and healthcare, and covering some topics that are already affecting all of us on a variety of levels. But before we get started, I'd like to introduce AIA LA Chapter President, Greg Farabian, with a few opening remarks.
Thanks, Sarah, and hello and good morning to all. Yes, I am Greg Farabian, the 2020 AIA LA President. During this very unique and memorable year. Thank you to everyone who walked across their living room, their bedroom, into their kitchen to join us for this virtual event. A couple of items before we start the formal program. First, a thank you to our sponsors for supporting the work of AILA Architecture and Healthcare Committee. And second, a thank you to the committee itself. Jia Cheng, AIA, Gary Goldberg, AIA, Eric Halm, AIA, Hanbi Chen, AIA, Tina Jorgadze, Mo Gudarzi, Gary Valinsky, Drew Elshoff, and Sarah Winters, who will moderate today's panel, as you already know. Last year, the committee's first conference was a workshop that drew upon the ideas and expertise of everyone in the room. The extent of interactivity among attendees and clients was a benchmark for the AIA LA conferences. And more importantly, the workshop connected progressive ideas and innovation with the pandemic, with the pragmatic, I'll just jump ahead to the pandemic here. The subject, the reimagination of a decommissioned hospital. This year, the committee once again integrates thought leading with the real world challenges, as today they invite us to discuss about the changing nature of access to healthcare. A conversation that responds to the systemic shift away from medical visits at larger centralized campuses towards care in localized communities at offices that are more convenient for patients. How do we respond to these new conditions through design? Accessible care. What is the shared future of retail and healthcare? The workshop takes place as we are reminded of the critical role of medical workers in not only attending to the health of individuals, but also the health of our society as a whole, and simultaneously how key the healthcare typology is to the communities we serve. With that in mind, I particularly offer the AIA's thanks to panel members, Jennifer Cheng, Mary Claire Lingell, Nancy Moses, Allison Warner, for sharing their valuable time with our members and for their contributions to today's discussions. And to begin the program, here's Eric Halm, AIA, Chair of the AILA Healthcare and Architecture Committee, and Co-Chair Hanbi Chen, AIA.
Thanks so much, Greg. Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much on behalf of the AIALA Healthcare Committee. I'd like to welcome all of you to our second annual symposium. And just really quick, just want to give Greg mentioned, thanked the sponsors, but I just want to thank them by name because, it's very generous of you to sponsor an event that's virtual. It's a little, we can't actually say you're the coffee sponsor or the luncheon sponsor sponsoring and participating. So we really thank you for your generosity. I'd like to thank ARIP for being the emerging professional sponsor. So thank you, Mo, and everybody from ARIP. Participating sponsors, HOK, and V, thanks. Hewitt Zollers, Siemens, Austin Commercial, Zotan, and everybody, thank you for Austin Commercial, as well as Bernard's. Friend of the Purposeful symposium are Reevely Engineers and Air Treatment Corporation. So for you, you from there, thank you so much for your sponsorship. And lastly, I'd like to thank the very generous sponsorship of presenting sponsor, Con-Am Building Company. Thank you so much. Con-Am came on very early, even before we knew we were going to be virtual as a presenting sponsor. So we'd really like to thank you for your generosity and commitment to the AIA-LA Health Committee and the AIA-LA. And I'll hand it over to Hun-Vee for further welcoming.
Thanks, Greg. As Greg mentioned, thank you, Eric. As Greg mentioned, you know, putting on a virtual event, this is the first time that we've done it, Purposeful, a large event like this. So really appreciate you guys joining us. It did take a lot of work. I did want to put an extra shout out to Gia Chang and Gary Goldberg, who did all the heavy lifting, as well as the rest of the committee. So they're all listed here. But also wanted to thank the AIA Los Angeles because you guys have provided us with the help in technology and logistics. So Corrine, you're always there for us at all of our events. Thank you so much, as well as Carlo and Tibby and others. So just wanted to make sure the AIA LA staff got a great shout out too. So with that, I will hand it back to Sarah.
Thank you, Hun-Vee, Eric, and Greg. So let's have a look at what are we up to today. This is our agenda. We've already checked off the coffee with a purpose portion. In a moment, we'll hear from committee member Gary Goldberg about the purpose of Purposeful, and then we'll move into our interactive panel discussion. Over the course of the next couple of hours, we'll be exploring three main topics, excuse me, virtual and telehealth, learning from retail, and lastly, envisioning the future. We'd love for the final part of the discussion, envisioning the future, to be led by you. So as we go along today, marinate on a question or a wild and crazy idea as to what the future of healthcare might be with everything that we now know and have experienced in mind. So what might it be, do, look like? And then we'll call on you later to share those ideas for discussion. In the meantime, warm up those mouse clicker fingers because we'll be hitting you with some live polls as we move through the discussion. And then just before we wrap up the moderated discussion, we'll save some time for an open Q&A. Please do hold all questions until that point. We will not be taking questions while the discussion is in progress. You will be completely ignored and your question will be lost forever. So jot it down and type it in when we ask you to do so. And don't hit the leave meeting button too early. There will be prizes if you stay until the end, and I won't tell you what they are, but I know what they are, and they're pretty good. So with that, now here is Gary to share a little bit about the purpose of Purposeful.
Gary, you have to unmute.
Thank you. So thank you, Sarah, for your efforts in keeping this unruly crowd under control with your stern warnings. And thanks, Eric, for reminding me that I was on mute. I hope that a lot of you who are here today were at the Purposeful event last year. If you were, you know that it was a very active and interactive event. In fact, it was the antithesis of social distancing. We had over 100 people in a 1,600 square foot room. And I would say that if creativity were a disease there, we would all be infected right now. And hopefully that was the case, because that's what we're asking of you today. Because we had such a successful event last year and we knew that we wanted to continue it, we struggled to find a way to replicate that infectious excitement and make this year's event as much like last year's as we could. However, we can't sit down with tracing paper and draw and point and talk and interact at the tables as we did last year. So we've come up with an alternative format. And as Sarah said, We want your ideas. This is your event, and the purpose of this is to generate thinking, new ideas, and excitement. So the heart and core of Purposeful is to jumpstart change by abandoning the constraints that tie us to past solutions and to take a risk-free leap into the future. We all know that change in healthcare happens very slowly because of the cycle time. We tend to repeat ourselves with solutions that have worked for us before, and that's the safe path. The big idea of Purposeful is to create a place and time here today to liberate your design thinking and to create, invent, and envision with intuitive skills that you've absorbed from the world around you, not just the hard-won professional skills and knowledge that you have, but from the things that you've learned as just being a person, as a consumer, as a patient of healthcare, as a family member of patients, all the other things that you've experienced in your daily life and that you're experiencing now in this very interesting time. So finally, our panelists are not just here for their expertise, and Sarah's going to introduce them in a moment, and you'll see what a highly qualified group we have. But they're here to respond to the ideas that we want to hear from you later in the program, and that we're going to draw from you by a series of polls that we've created to learn your attitudes on virtual healthcare, on the kinds of things that we're learning from retail by the constraints that are being put on us by this pandemic. So everybody get excited, listen to what's happening, and we're ready to get started. So thank you. And thank you to the amazing committee that we had that put this together. It was a lot of work, and I think you're going to enjoy it. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Gary. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce our esteemed panelists for today. We have with us Jennifer Cheng. Jennifer is the Program Manager for Planning, Real Estate, Facilities, Construction, and Operations. That's a lot. With Hoag Memorial Hospital Presbyterian. Hoag, for those among us who aren't aware, is a nonprofit regional healthcare delivery network in Orange County, consisting of 2 acute care hospitals, 13 urgent care centers, 9 health centers, and a network of more than 1,700 physicians. Jennifer is passionate about helping others and draws inspiration from a wide network to help different groups find new ways to work through persistent challenges, design intelligent systems, and to create environments that truly improve the lives of others. In her role at Hoag, Jennifer leads the team that is responsible for refining outpatient real estate strategies, facility planning, and developing Hoag's portfolio of projects, which includes the new Irvine LDRP birthing suites and the Irvine Hospital expansion. Her work involves really creating a transitional bridge between clinical users, strategy, leaders, designers, and the construction community to develop creative and effective facility strategies to solve multifaceted problems. We also have with us today Mary Claire Lingal, who is the Vice President of Strategic Integration for Cedars-Sinai Medical Network, which is a rapidly growing part of the larger Cedars-Sinai health system. It's renowned for its high quality and its dedication to quality outcomes and the patient experience. In her role, Mary Claire oversees the medical network's programmatic development and expansion, new models of care and practice transformation, strategic space planning, and patient experience. Her operational responsibilities include the medical network oncology practices, clinical research, urgent care, and emerging programs in developing outpatient geographies. Mary Claire's leadership has driven the organization's strategic expansion of the outpatient physician enterprise and the implementation of innovative models of care, including virtual services, which we'll be talking a lot about today, enhanced access and practice transformation across specialties and programs. And she is at all times focused on clinical excellence and all facets of the engaged patient experience. Her career with Cedars began over 20 years ago, and during her time with Cedars, she's held leadership roles in finance, budget, decision support, business development, marketing, and clinical operations. Nancy Moses is a senior vice president with Trammell Crow, which is one of the nation's oldest and most prolific developers of and investors in commercial real estate. Nancy specializes in client management, helping users to identify and implement real estate solutions, and is sought after by clients for her ability to provide a turnkey delivery from the initial programming through to project closeout. With a primary focus on healthcare and office development for the Los Angeles business unit, her expertise is extremely relevant today. She has successfully delivered over 1.2 million square feet of office and healthcare development projects, with more than 500,000 square feet currently under construction. Alison Warner is vice president of investments with Regency Centers. Regency Centers owns, operates, and develops dominant grocery-anchored retail centers in the country's strongest markets. In her role, Alison oversees the development and construction activities throughout Northern California. In addition to identifying new opportunities in core urban markets, her team continually takes a fresh look at their existing portfolio of over 30 retail centers in an effort to constantly elevate them into vibrant neighborhood gathering places. She is a civil engineer and a LEED accredited professional with extensive knowledge and experience in land development, project design, and construction controls across multiple typologies. I'm sure you will all be in agreement with me when I say that this is an incredibly highly qualified group of panelists today, and should make for a fantastic discussion. I see that the sun is coming through my blinds in a weird way, and I have some squares on my head, so I'm going to adjust those quickly. It's a little bit weirder, but I don't know what to tell you. Hopefully they're not too distracting. So let's get started with our panel discussion. The way we access care has been evolving, driven by new technologies, new care delivery strategies, and the changing wants and needs of consumers. We thought we were seeing signs of disruption before, with healthcare providers and patients alike taking cues from the retail world, looking for ways to streamline and improve access to quality care. And in many, many ways, the pandemic has kicked things now into overdrive. We're seeing and hearing about ideas and approaches that will, and in some cases already are, truly shaping and reshaping the future of healthcare as we know it, as we've always known it. So we sort of started this conversation actually earlier this morning with many of you in the Coffee with a Purpose discussion rooms, and we'd love to pick up that thread with our panelists. One of the main topics was how each of us have changed the way that we shop and how much more digital forward our lives have become since the pandemic. It seems like there was a lot of mixed feedback. A lot of people have decided to move to getting their groceries in online. Some people have struggled with that and gone back to just doing their grocery shopping in person. Some people have switched from going to the big grocery stores they always did to seeking out those smaller mom and pop shops. Oh, okay, sorry for the interruption. So Alison, let's start with you. How has the pandemic changed the way that you shop and get groceries in?
Thanks, Sarah, and good morning to everyone. Thanks for having me on this panel. I think that that's an interesting question for me personally. It hasn't significantly changed because I already live in San Francisco in a very urban environment. Have, kind of a working dad, working mom home. And so the idea of Instacart and groceries getting delivered was already very prevalent in our household. Personally, what I found as the pandemic has gone on, I'm finding myself craving brick and mortar more and more and more. And so as tenants and as retail are evolving and adjusting themselves, I'm finding that I'm seeking out curbside pickup a lot more. I think that's a really good middle ground where I don't necessarily feel like I have to go in the store and expose myself in environments where I may not be comfortable, but I still get to be out and about and still get that immediacy. And I'd say I probably personally use Amazon less. But I think that that answer could be very different depending on if you live in the suburbs and what your habits were pre-pandemic. So I'll be really interested to hear how other people respond here.
And Jennifer, what hasn't changed for you? What stayed the same?
Me, you know, surprisingly, I still shop on Amazon and I still buy my groceries in person. And I think that has to do with, you know, I like having choice. I like, even though in an environment and world where we want to encourage touchless, I like to touch my groceries and select my produce, right? So I've ended up not really actually changing my behaviors too much, which is surprising. And only because I tried to order online groceries in the beginning, but I think the system in the back has to be able to support the influx of online ordering. If it's not able to support that, then you don't have a successful system pushing towards online retail, delivery of care. For example, groceries, it took me 3 weeks if I wanted to try to order groceries online to get a slot for delivery on Amazon. So, you know, that's part of the proponent of why I decided to do a lot of things in person.
Jennifer, I have to say I had the exact same experience. I decided to go back to ordering all my groceries online like I used to do in New York, and it was impossible to get a delivery window. So I just threw the towel in and went back to shop myself.
Yeah.
So another thing we'll be talking about a lot today is how the pandemic has changed the way people access healthcare. Nancy, has anything changed for you and for your family?
I've noticed a lot of people are a lot afraid to go to the hospital or go to a visit. And I think it's somewhat concerning, and hopefully throughout this process, people will start to change that mindset. But having a husband who also works in the healthcare industry and working a lot with hospitals, they're seeing just a complete decrease in patients who want to make sure that their heart condition is okay, or if they don't feel well, they're afraid to go to the doctor, which is slightly concerning. My brother is a physical therapist and he's trying to do everything online, which is very difficult because he finds that people will call him from the car and they'll talk to him about an ailment, and he's trying to help diagnose what their issue is, but it's very difficult to talk to somebody when they're not physically interacting with you. I do see a lot of benefits, however, to telemedicine, which I know it has shifted quite a bit, especially I would say for parents. I have 3 children, to be able to call my doctor, one that I know, just to call and say, hey, my child's not feeling well, or I think they have a fever, or there's an ailment. The benefit of being able to call your doctor versus having to schedule an appointment. It's just trying to really shift that dynamic and how we can introduce that level of comfort.
Yeah, I think, you know, comfort level and maintaining quality of care, you know, with in-person versus virtual is important. I think it's a concern for everyone. It's definitely something we're going to touch on a little bit later. Yep. We've seen a lot of articles coming out. I saw one in the New York Times recently about the effects that quarantine is having on people's health outside of the virus itself. So, you know, what is the pandemic and what is quarantine doing to people's mental and physical health? And I think it just would be interesting to hear how have we been affected. And, you know, Mary Claire, have you found that quarantining and, you know, everything that's going on with the pandemic has affected you at all?
It certainly has affected me personally. I think like most people, it's more difficult to exercise. It's more difficult to even move around as much as we used to. Like many people, I wear a fitness tracker, and it's shocking to me at the end of a Zoom day from home that, you know, maybe I've taken 100 steps. My house is not that large. So it's really quite concerning. And I think for those of us in healthcare, we are absolutely seeing patients present with conditions that are further advanced than they would have been otherwise. And in the field of oncology, I'll use as one example, we have really big concerns about that. Patients are presenting in much more dire circumstances. And our oncologists and our surgical oncologists are struggling as well because they are intervening at a later stage in the progression of the disease. So there's this ripple effect that I think the quarantine has across society, and the stressors of quarantine resulting in poorer health maintenance overall and less proactive preventative care, which then spreads through the care teams and the physicians and the clinicians who care for the patients in a very traumatic way. So I think we ask ourselves often, is this the new normal? And I would say, gosh, I hope not. Because I think we will really, in healthcare for sure, be in dire straits, and society as a whole will not be better because of this. So I think we really do have to figure out ways to make it comfortable and safe for patients to come back. And it's interesting to me when we think about how many of us still shop, but we won't go into a healthcare facility. I would maybe put out the thought that I think a grocery store is potentially more dangerous than most high quality healthcare institutions, but I don't think we've gotten that message out there fully.
Yeah, I think there's probably a perception that a healthcare location is where the sick people are. Mm-hmm. And I want to stay away from that, whereas they're walking among us in the freezer section.
Right.
So I think this is actually a really great segue into our first poll for the day, which is going to be looking at how much did you use virtual healthcare before compared to post-pandemic? Corinne, hit us with your best shot.
And Sarah, while everyone's doing the poll, and I think Mary Claire, you had hit upon this as well, the mental health component of the quarantine is really important. And I think working with even just reaching out, finding touch points every single day, whether it's with colleagues that you work with or just friends that you haven't talked to in a while, it's really important. And I think it's important, I'm noticing specifically for my children, just not having that social interaction and how critical it is for them and just how excited they are if they actually see someone or get to talk to someone. And I've even set up Zoom dates for my children because it's important. It's really important to your mental health. And I think that's also going to be the downside to this quarantine, is how we are going to help a lot of the mental health issues that come out of this and being stuck at home, being forced to work from home. And a lot of people are okay with it, or some feel they're okay with it. A lot of people are not.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that this really is a shared experience. And even if you're by yourself, you're not alone. You're not the only one that's going through it. And, you know, I think perspective is a big part of that. And definitely trying to work from home school with an active 4-year-old is, I only have one. I can't even imagine the people that have more than one child, yourself, Nancy, with 3. Some days things feel like they're spiraling out of control. And then I'm like, Nancy has 3 of these running around. So it helps to remember that you're not in it alone. But then, those days when you get a call from a friend or you reach out, it makes a big difference.
100% agree. And it's all perspective. We're all suffering. This is hard for all of us.
we had around over 90% of people voted, so thank you so much. Would you like me to share the results?
Yeah. Well, so before the pandemic, most people, well, half of us had never used virtual, and the other majority was only occasionally, and I will say that I myself was an occasional respondent. And let's see, since the pandemic, it doesn't look like a ton has changed. We've seen increases in healthcare visits being virtual, but it seems like the ratios are about the same. That's really interesting. How do those responses track with what you guys are seeing at Cedars and Hoag in terms of telehealth use now versus pre-pandemic? Jennifer, do you want to start?
Sure. So funny thing is, pre-pandemic, telehealth consultations were basically non-existent for us. And that's due to, CMS reassessing the reimbursement now, existing technologies and applications and how well they are developed. And surprisingly, also the reluctance from our physicians as well to adopt utilizing that platform because it wasn't as user-friendly and the data synchronization on the back end wasn't all there, right? So we want to make sure that's sort of all seamless before our physicians and our patients actually utilize the system. I think the reason being that is probably because of the preference towards still facial interactions, the demographic, and, applications just weren't there yet. Now, during the first few initial months of the pandemic, everyone was pushing and scrambling to push their telehealth platform because we had to. And the funny thing is COVID really accelerated technology and where we are supposed to be at this day and age. And although we did see adoptions rise, we also saw a significant dip in patient volumes, to Nancy's point, to Mary's point as well, that, folks were really just delaying their point of care because they didn't want to go into the hospital setting, but they still weren't comfortable yet with utilizing the telehealth services that were available. And so by wanting to delay their care and avoiding exposure, patients, especially the older and more chronic patients, were suffering and really afflicted by the pandemic. And so later on, around now in this time, we've been seeing an uptick in our emergency visits because of that delayed point of care. So it's interesting to see how things have sort of progressed at this point. But with telehealth, although we're pushing it, it is starting to stabilize around 25% of our visits, only because our digital platform is still being refined. Not everyone still has the webcam or the technology or comfort level to utilize it. And because the facilities are trying to be better at supporting cleaning protocols in-house, and that messaging is getting out to the community, patients are more comfortable scheduling in-person visits, with that being an advantage to the care that we provide.
Yeah, I would add to Jennifer's comments that our experience at Cedars-Sinai is very similar. And I think there's an interesting risk calculation that we all go through in our minds around going in for healthcare concerns during a pandemic. And I would also say, I think we're missing a rep at this table. I think the media needs to be involved in this conversation. And I think much of the fear that patients have felt about coming into healthcare establishments, either hospital or outpatient, has been driven by conflicting, media reports that have come out in a very emotionally heightened way. And so, you have someone who makes that calculation and says, I'm going to delay my mammogram, even though I have a family history of breast cancer, because I think I'm going to get COVID. I think most physicians would say that's a very faulty algorithm to be utilizing. And again, we haven't done a good job in communicating that to society and in general. So lots of work to do still in really encouraging patients to come back. I think we are settling out at about 20% virtual, still have a lot of work to do to make the interaction more seamless for our patients. But another point I would make is when the pandemic hit, I'm always proud of doctors and clinicians. I feel very privileged to work with them. And one of the things that really struck me was how insistent they all were in figuring out a way to connect to patients when patients were afraid to come see them. And so suddenly all the barriers dropped, and healthcare is notoriously risk averse when it comes to innovation. I think somewhat appropriately conservative. But we did our own risk calculation. I think healthcare providers realized that something was better than nothing, and therefore we moved forward with incredible speed. And I think across the country, across the world, these new technologies were adopted very quickly without any sort of immediate downside. I do think long term, if we don't see our patients enough face to face, there will be quality issues and safety issues. But it was remarkable to me. It was a great object lesson in what healthcare can do when there is a commonly held and understood and pressing mission.
Mm-hmm. Great. I think that's a nice lead into our second poll around, do your healthcare providers or insurance plans offer access to virtual care, and is it convenient and easy to use? And while we wait for those responses to come in, would love to hear, maybe Mary Claire, you can kind of continue that train of thought there, just about, what are some of the variables that might be preventing the use of telehealth to increase further, or, do we want it? Do we want more people to be using telehealth more often, or do we want it to stay stabilized and for people to know that they should still come in person?
My personal opinion is that I think we're going to learn a lot about what the right mix of modalities really is in healthcare. I have a hard time imagining that we will be 80% virtual. Although I will say some specialties are very well suited for virtual. So if you think about behavioral health and the increase in need that we're seeing, I think a virtual interface with a counselor or a therapist is quite good, and might even be better than traveling to see someone and doing it in person. There's an intimacy to a virtual connection that I've in talking with our behavioral health team. They feel that it actually advances the relationship in a way that they didn't have access to before. So I think it's going to vary by specialty, but if you think about primary care as one example, and the importance of the information you get from being in the room with the patient, we've all experienced it over Zoom. We get less information from each other in this kind of interaction than we would if we were in the same room. And for a physician, the importance of the hands-on exam, I don't expect that will diminish in importance. I think the question is, how often do you need the face-to-face, and in what circumstances do you need the face-to-face? And if you contrast that with someone, a patient that you know well, and maybe you are working with them to manage their diabetes, do you always have to do it face-to-face? Probably not. And it might be great to have quick virtual touch points that are more kind of coaching and motivational moments with your physician to keep you on track.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Are you ladies finding difficulties with HIPAA in the online patient experience?
We haven't had yet, and I'm gonna kind of knock on wood around that. We haven't yet had any issues, although I will say I'm somewhat surprised by that. And the reason I'm surprised is our technology hasn't kept pace with the physicians' use of the technology. So we have our own HIPAA compliant, Epic-based patient portal for video visits, but it doesn't always work in every patient encounter. So you see physicians and patients using other platforms, which are not set up in the same way. They aren't integrated with our electronic medical record. And I think there is the potential for HIPAA problems at some point.
Should I share the results?
Yeah. So it seems like most people are having a fairly positive experience in having access to virtual healthcare. You know, when it comes to convenience and ease of use, it starts to kind of get a little bit closer to leveling out. I have to say myself personally, I was a somewhat respondent in terms of convenience and ease of use. I think it would be interesting to hear, Jennifer, you know, what have you been seeing at Hoag, you know, along the lines of what Mary Claire was just speaking on, but also, you know, what services are you guys finding that people are using telehealth options for predominantly?
You know, surprisingly, the services that are being utilized more predominantly are, to Nancy's point, pediatric services, just because from a safety perspective, parents want to conveniently have their children next to them and also have on-phone call conversations with their providers. Our primary care provider visits too have gone more telehealth as well. But aside from that, I think behavioral health, to Mary Claire's point too, has also gone up from a telehealth visit standpoint, just because if you can do as much of it remotely but virtual and still provide that intimate one-on-one attention, the patients are still comfortable with that as well. I think to just sort of backstep a little bit on what Mary Claire's point was, depending on the service offerings, you know, certain services are more suited for telehealth, and you know, OBGYN services, for example, when a woman wants to come in and have certain things checked out, those things do primarily involve more hands-on, face-to-face interactions with the provider in order to have a proper diagnosis. But you know what, along the rest of your care plan and that we develop with you, we can identify, you know, which of those visits could potentially be virtual to minimize the time that you need to spend in your car driving to a facility to have your consultations and checkups. And so I think that's incredibly important. And overall, the goal for everyone and all healthcare organizations should be to deliver an omni-channel delivery of care, which means your patient and your customer is at your core, and the overall experience that you provide to your patients on media, on digital, in person, all has to be the same branded experience. So to them, there is really no difference in their perception on the quality of care that they're receiving. And so that's the ultimate goal. But Mary Claire, I'd be curious to see what your thoughts are regarding that omni-channel delivery of care.
Oh, I completely agree with you. I think it's all about healthcare understanding that we really need to, we use this phrase all the time, but I don't know that we've ever really meant it when we've said it, you know, meet the patient where they are. I mean, we've said that for decades, but I'm not sure healthcare has really been genuine in talking about that. I think now we're genuine about it because we have to be. And we know that we'll lose connection with our patients if we don't actually figure out how to do it to meet their needs. And I think there's also an interesting component to thinking about visits not as kind of delivered in one way. The visit itself could be broken up. So I'll take the example of oncology again. In the middle of the pandemic, obviously when it first started, there was a lot of anxiety amongst oncology patients. They needed to come in, and our physicians really need to have labs before they are talking to an oncology patient. So we actually quickly designed a workflow where there was a drive-through lab option. You know, a patient could stick their arm out the window, we could draw the lab. We kind of adopted our, to be perfectly honest, a parking lot to do this because we needed to get those oncology patients in. And then they were able to do a video visit with, and the physician had all the information they needed from the lab. So I think we might see visits getting structured, not only a clinician's day getting structured with some telehealth and face-to-face, but in one encounter with a patient, there might be a portion that's virtual versus face-to-face.
I think it's really, oh, sorry, please go on.
No, I think I was also going to share that one of the key things that designers should also focus on is that the environment should also promote trust, right? And that's one of the biggest variables in, you know, making sure telehealth has an opportunity to really take hold. And it's making sure we don't lose the trust with our patients, building the relationship so that even if it's virtual, they feel that they're still connecting with you. And to that point, the existing workflows have to be restructured, remade, and redefined to support it. I think Cedars-Sinai and Hoag are pretty aligned in a lot of the thinking. It's probably where a lot of folks are right now nowadays, knowing and recognizing that we have to move towards that direction.
So I think, you know, something that came up in one of our prep discussions was the fact that there's oftentimes a discrepancy between what people think can and should be handled virtually versus in person. Sometimes the patient may think one thing, the provider thinks another. I had an incident with my son. He had looked like a finger had got infected. I knew what was happening. I knew that just one look and the doctor would prescribe him some antibiotics. I knew exactly which antibiotics she would give him because this has happened before. And, I tried to do a virtual appointment because I was like, she just needs to see on the video what's happening. And I was told, absolutely not, you have to come into urgent care. And then everything that I thought was going to happen down to the type of antibiotic and for the number of days and the dosage was exactly what I expected. And, I think for me as the patient's parent, I was like, this could have all happened via a Zoom call, but the provider obviously felt otherwise. What type of education and what type of conversation, you mentioned that, the media is missing from the table. What type of conversation needs to be being had? What type of message needs to be put out there about this sort of thing so that people know what to expect as we move forward into this realm?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here. The example for your son with pediatrics, I think when it comes to injuries and acute illnesses with children, I think there is a very conservative calculation that clinicians go through around the care of kids, especially young kids like your son, because things can progress very, very rapidly in a child versus an adult. So I do think your example is a great one because it points up how complex the information is and how difficult it is to translate that through to the public in general in a way that could be understood. And so part of what I'm hearing in your story is that it would have been helpful for there maybe to be more conversation with you as the parent as to why the clinician felt it was important to come in so that it didn't end up feeling somewhat unnecessary to you. You might have still felt it could have been done over Zoom. And I do think we may evolve further along that continuum and do more things virtually than we're comfortable with right now. But I think it's going to be an evolution. And I think the interesting part of this is there's a partnership between the comfort level of the clinician and the comfort level of the patient. And those don't always match. And they don't always match. And sometimes the patient is probably right. And many times the clinician is right. And so it really comes down to how do we continue talking to each other, not just about the care that we're getting. We now have to talk about how are we getting that care, and why are we getting it that way?
I'd have to imagine we live in a very litigious state that it would be difficult for a physician to want to feel comfortable working with your child, especially even what if they have lead in their finger and the doctor just doesn't see it. It's really important for that interaction and making sure that they can properly diagnose, especially with children. So I can understand both points. I mean, I think as parents, we definitely know our children.
Mm-hmm.
And as a physician, they really only see your child maybe once every year, a couple times a year, depending on how active your child is. Mine is very active. But I think it's just really important that, you know, as a community, we have to learn to trust our doctors a little bit to that extent, but following up. And I think what's really nice is if the physician then continues to follow up and you have Zoom calls to make sure that the healing process is going well. I think that goes a long way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's just because I'm Australian and we're like, well, did you get bitten by a deadly spider? No, that's fine.
That
You
might
know,
be part of it.
Sarah, I also think that a lot of it, besides the comfort level of the clinician differing from the comfort level of the patient, hopefully in the future that sort of levels out. It's just that in this technological day and age, consumers with access to, you know, the online world now are becoming actually more and more educated and invested in their care. And so what happens is when a physician tells a patient, I think you need to come in and do X, Y, Z, most likely the person has already probably done some predecessor research to say, you know what, I think I already know what my child or my mother needs. You know, can you just, from a formality standpoint, issue those medications or release certain forms for them to get this next type of service, when in reality the physician just wants to really be thorough in the quality of care that they're providing. So I do think that as we move forward into the future, the consumers becoming more educated because of the online resources available plays a part and a role in the active management of their own personal health and of their loved ones as well.
And I
have considered changing my name to Sarah Winters WebMD.
Right, and that's my daughter's name. She's already taken that. Yes, but I do think there is this evolution that was already happening even prior to the pandemic around what can patients understand about their conditions. I'll use the example of how long did it take us to accept that a patient could call us and say, a female patient could call us and say, I think I have a UTI again, or a yeast infection. I'd like a prescription because I know those symptoms inside and out. And that's a different clinical scenario than an oncology patient who is having multiple UTIs, which is an indication of other things going on. And so there's all this complexity that has to be kind of unpacked, but I do think it's going in the right direction to find that sweet spot, to Jennifer's point, of what can patients kind of drive or determine, and where do we really need the clinician to say, hold on a second, I think we might actually need to see each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Allison, were you going to add something?
I was just going to chime in really quickly that this idea of the consumer and the customer having more information or thinking that they have all the information prior to showing up is also very prevalent in retail. And, you know, you can go online and research exactly what product you want and show up at a store, and you actually do know more than the person serving you at the store. And it's almost the reverse in healthcare. And so this idea of, depending on the service you're offering, how do you best integrate education into the service that you're providing so that your consumer is coming to you for both? I mean, the challenges are different in retail versus healthcare, but still that same idea of access to information has definitely changed people's perceptions of the service they're seeking out or how they use that service.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really good segue actually into our more retail focused section of the conversation. And there are a lot of really strong analogies between healthcare and retail, you know, as we've just covered, in the sense in particular that just like you might prefer to only shop in store for certain things, you want to see the avocado with your own eyes. You want to see how high-waisted really are those trousers. people are going to have preferences about what health services they may only wish to receive in person. And, you know, I think the point that you raised, Alison, of how people have kind of become even more educated than the person they're going into the store for. We're seeing that in healthcare, and when healthcare comes into a retail environment, how does that impact, you know, mindset that they might be bringing with them? When I go to a retail place, I think one way. This when I go to a healthcare place, I think one way. But showing up at healthcare and retail, what does that do? I think before we continue the conversation, let's do another quick poll. So before the pandemic, how much did you use online or non-contact shopping and food services versus after the pandemic? What do you see in your behaviors? And then while that's going on, so Alison, just coming back to you. So your retail centers are all in major markets. They're all anchored by grocery stores. So you and your team must really be on the front lines in terms of observations in the ways in which the pandemic has shifted the way that people engage with brick and mortar retail. Can you speak a little to that and whether you think there has been a shift? Do you think that shift is here to stay?
Yeah, so we are very lucky that our business model well, let me restart. But the company chose the business model of providing daily needs in major markets for this exact reason. It really does survive the test of times and the challenges of the different cycles. And we're seeing that right now. You know, pre-pandemic, what I would say is a lot of what we talked about and what we thought about is how is internet penetrating, you know, what we thought was, you know, a market that it really couldn't penetrate because we thought people just had to go pick out their own avocados, their own bananas, et cetera. And it turns out that people are getting more and more comfortable with different types of delivery services. So I think that that was a huge sort of concern and risk going into the pandemic that we were trying to position ourselves to stay out ahead of, and how can we better integrate those services and make it easier to provide those from our centers. Well, now what we're seeing is, you know, sort of with the pandemic, brick and mortar is still absolutely relevant. And all of those grocery stores, pharmacies, anything deemed an essential service who've been able to stay open have still maintained their sales, and actually in some experiences have sort of exceeded sales from before, because I think we saw a lot of people trying to stock up in advance of having to shelter in place and so forth. I think that as a landlord, we're spending more time and care sort of making sure our property is set up to abide by the different distancing requirements, and you know, how clean and how often are we cleaning our properties, and making it easier for our tenants to sort of do the same and limit the capacities. But most of those tenants are, you know, they're going strong. It's really the non-essential uses who've had to close that are struggling the most.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, you know, kind of in following on in that same vein, I think Nancy, it would be great to hear from you. I'm answering the poll too, you guys.
Okay, so jumping into retail, I will say, me personally, I have discovered Shipt through Target and absolutely love it. And I'm really enjoying, and I think maybe the mindset overall has changed. Instead of going to the market maybe once a week, more of the European style where we go and purchase what we need for the day or for a couple days. So almost going to the market more, because really there's not a lot to do, and trying to enjoy something where going to just to pick up a couple of things. I tend to wake up early, so I don't really have an issue with crowds. I do think that it is important. Brick and mortar is not going away. And I had previously given the example that, you know, Amazon is an online retailer, but they're looking to provide brick and mortar stores, because there is something to be said for the consumer experience and going to a restaurant and having that face-to-face interaction and getting to go look and see just how high-waisted trousers, how high they are, especially now we're all stuck at home. We really need high-waisted trousers. There's something to be said for that experience, and it won't go away. We just have to figure out, as this group here, how we change that dynamic. And same thing as it ties back to healthcare, really creating that atmosphere and that availability that maybe telemedicine has, or finding other locations where healthcare really wants to be, so that we are still providing that patient care experience. And I'm going to point to Greg. I don't know if you can see me pointing to Greg. I'm working with him on a huge project in NoHo. And we're, it's very important to me. I'm talking about whether or not we want to incorporate healthcare into this master plan that we're working on, because it is multifamily, it's office, it's retail, and we're missing healthcare. And I think that if we're looking for, especially in Los Angeles, if we're looking for in the future when we can open again, because we will open again, and I think that office is not going away. I don't think that retail is going away. We will want to have that convenience, especially for the big techtainment tenants that we're looking at. And I know that already, I think that Cedars and I think Hogue are already partnering with universities. They're partnering with retail centers. They're partnering with Amazon, because that's what the future of, I think, office, retail, healthcare is going to be. It's going to be a combination and ease.
That omni-channel delivery method.
Right.
Well, and Alison, as you and your team look at retail centers, and you have big grocery store anchors, and as you start to talk to healthcare providers like the Cedars and the Hogues and the everyone else's, what are some of the conversations that you're having with, even with developers like Nancy, about how healthcare can integrate into those retail environments?
Sorry, who was the conversation or the question directed at?
Oh, I'm so sorry. That was Alison. That was at you.
Yeah.
Okay, I figured. Yeah, what we're seeing is actually healthcare is one of the more active tenants out looking for space right now. And we love to see that, because I think that when you layer on, grocery, pharmacy, healthcare is another one of those daily needs, daily essentials that works really well. In all honesty, some of the struggles that we have is we've owned these properties for so long, and some of these leases are so old that there is sort of this historical view by tenants that maybe healthcare, gyms, like really health and well care type uses were prohibited back in the day, because they were sort of viewed as taking up parking. I don't want my parking space for my grocery store to be used by that guy going to the gym for 2 hours. The shift has been, the grocery stores especially, this shift towards health and welfare generally in the market is that, that customer is my customer. And if I can be as convenient, as accessible as that customer, that's great. So then it becomes a conversation of working through lease language where we're all on the same page, but let's start modifying some of the restriction language in the leases. So that's kind of one challenge that we see. But generally speaking, just to kind of touch on one other thing, I think that the idea that in healthcare, it's a very intimate use. Everyone has these personal opinions about what they're comfortable and, doing online versus in person. And, that's different for each person, and there's personal choices. I mean, that is the same with retail. And so I think that providing a brick and mortar location in a grocery, anchored shopping center for a healthcare user is starting to expand that sort of omni-channel presence to be able to touch every one of their customers in the same way that we're trying to do. We own brick and mortar, but we also recognize that being able to get your groceries delivered isn't going away. So how can we better integrate the two and make it more accessible and less frictionless for the customer overall, no matter, what they're coming to our center for?
Right.
I love what Alison is saying. It's truly, honestly, to her point, healthcare has been actively approaching retail centers, because we also recognize the need to be in that brick and mortar environment. And the reason for that is because, you know, as much as you push telehealth, again, you want to be part of that integrated lifestyle that you provide for your consumers and patients, right? And the integrated lifestyle includes shopping for groceries, shopping for, you know, fun, entertainment, but also your care. It shouldn't feel like health is a negative aspect. I think in the past, shopping retail centers are also a little bit more mindful about having healthcare is because the association and perception of sick, achy people in my cool retail center isn't going to help from a consumer-centric standpoint has changed, because they recognize that now that we're, you know, doing more management and consumers are trying to manage things more themselves, you know, brick and mortar is even more essential. And synergistically, healthcare and retail are hand in hand. Let's just hold hands and, you know, be happy and love. But we share that same customer base. And so, you know, it's so important. And, you know, we have partnered with Regency in multiple locations for Hogue to offer healthcare facilities in multiple retail centers. And, you know, from an offering standpoint, really, I want to say that although brick and mortar is still absolutely relevant, as we move forward, maybe the scalability of the facilities are the ones that change, depending on what, again, to Mary Claire's point, can be offered from a service standpoint. And so, you know, we could be a standalone clinic and a shopping center, which is a lot more traditional and what you used to see more. More and more you now see as part of a healthcare village, where we have Tustin Hogue Health Center, Tustin in Tustin Legacy, and so it's a comprehensive health village. Everything is there at your fingertips. Or again, we have another facility, Foothill Ranch, that has recently opened, and that is all about integrated lifestyle. You go there, you can work out, there's gym care as well, and you can go next door and shop at Target and Walmart, everything's there. And so as we continue to evolve, retail and healthcare will really be sort of taking that next charge to omni-channel type of delivery.
And I think we're really seeing that reflected in these poll results. So pre-pandemic, you know, using online, other non-contact services, the majority of people said rarely. And then since the pandemic, it's really kind of starting to even out across the board. And this conversation about omni-channel deliveries of care, you know, it makes me feel that we may start to see that kind of even out across the board even more and continue once we move into post-pandemic, post-quarantine territory. And, you know, on the subject of retail and creating those all-encompassing wellness villages, you know, at the same time, we've also seen a move towards more of a decentralized kind of community-based model of care. And Mary Claire, I know that's something, you know, based on the work that we've been doing with CEDARS at CGF, that's something that you guys have been thinking a lot about and approaching in a really thoughtful way. CEDARS Sinai, the Playa Vista Urgent Care and Physician's Office location really comes to mind first and foremost. Would love to hear from you on the topic.
Sure. So I think an important topic that we're starting to approach here is how do we go about integrating healthcare in retail settings and then also other communities? And Los Angeles is such a great example, I think, because I've always felt that Los Angeles is really a city of cities. There's not one look or feel, and every community has its own personality and its own aesthetic. And so we really wanted to go into different environments, being respectful of the existing culture and aesthetic of that environment, and fitting in. So we want people to walk into our locations, whether it's in Playa Vista or Culver City, or we're building a site in Hillhurst. We want them to walk in knowing that they're in the good hands of CEDARS Sinai. We want to signal all of that kind of brand awareness and safety and quality, but also feel as though that they're in a neighborhood establishment. And one of the most interesting, learnings we've had is establishing our Playa Vista site, which is in the middle of a very busy retail and, residential establishment. And I'll be honest, I did have concerns about how could we create a calm and supportive kind of an oasis for our patients within that busy retail environment. And we have an urgent care there. So often, I think many people on this call would know that when you go to urgent care, you might be dizzy, you might be nauseous, you might be experiencing lots of things that would lead you to not necessarily want to engage with the retail environment. Versus you're going to urgent care for something quite simple, you're going to get it taken care of. And yes, you might pick up your groceries at, Whole Foods on your way out, which is, so very different people walking through the door that we had to think about. And I think we've had good success in integrating with that community. I think the community is happy that we're there. I also think a point I wanted to make is going into retail environments in particular, I think forces healthcare to up their game. So when you think about a historical physician office, that just doesn't cut it in really most retail environments at this point in time, where the focus is on not just purchasing the product, but the experience you have while you're purchasing the product. So I think that's a really good influence on outpatient medicine because it should be about closing that gap between what we feel when we walk into some of our more advanced hospital environments where there is a lot of thought around the patient's experience. Cedars-Sinai has these incredibly beautiful healing gardens, right? And then you go to an outpatient physician office and there's a big gap in the experience. So we're really looking to close that gap so that patients get the care that they need, but they also can experience it in an environment that doesn't feel overtly clinical, sterile, and off-putting.
I think that's really important. And Nancy, in your work in developing, brick and mortar healthcare spaces, what have you been seeing? Have you been seeing an uptick or a slowdown in any particular areas of health services before or since the pandemic? I think Mary Claire's point about, people's preferences and concerns when they're going to go and present at an urgent care, how they're feeling about where they're going is, has that sort of thing been part of the discussion and influencing factor?
Well, clearly pre-pandemic, we were a lot busier. Everyone was. I do think pre-pandemic, and this is consistent, outpatient care is far more prevalent than the hospital. And I know that a lot of the systems are working to provide outpatient care and how we change that. I do believe that, that stigma of having to go to the doctor, having to wait in line, having to drive all the way over here is really something that healthcare providers have to work on. And I think, this pandemic is really shifting the way that they're trying to make sure they encourage their patients to come. So this whole retailization is important because there is a convenience factor. It is important. Everyone's incredibly busy and everyone does want that experience that they're going to. They feel safe, they're comfortable. And, it'd be great if I could stop into Starbucks before I go to the doctor's office, and then I could run to the market afterwards, or I could have lunch, or I could go do yoga after my doctor's appointment. I think that there's a lot to be said for that, and a lot of patients, especially as a developer, we're looking at who's the next generation? What are the generations we're designing for? And for the longest time, we were designing for the baby boomers. And then we shifted to the millennials, millennials do want that telemedicine, their WebMD, looking at everything online. The Gen Z is coming into the workforce. So Gen Z, they want personal interaction. They want that ability to see someone face to face. They want the ability to go somewhere and touch, feel something. So I think, a lot of healthcare providers are looking at how we incorporate all three of these generations to make that experience work for them. It's going to be a huge change, but I think the healthcare systems are really open to it.
Nancy, I think that's great that you said that. I think the key ultimately overarching for everything is to feel that there's not a disruption in your point of care. It's just fluid all the way across. You know, another thought occurred to me too. I think, you know, retailization, besides being brick and mortar, has also evolved to also becoming more accessibility and convenience at home. So providing the care and how you deliver that platform at home is also going to essentially become more and more important over time too, because I think consumers over time will potentially expect services such as home health, or maybe we go back to MD visits at the home place. Infusions and maternal health, those types of things being also offered at the home setting as well, because retail is being delivered to your home as well. So, you know, there's a lot of correlation here, and it's going to be interesting to see how that really evolves.
Yeah, I think that is the kind of new horizon. And I wanted to come back to, I think, Allison, you brought up something that I thought was quite provocative, which is in retail, customers are often, you know, shopping online or coming into bricks and mortar, knowing more about the product than maybe the person that's helping them. And so when we think about online services as a shopper, how is that going to change as products evolve? So if I go online and I typically shop at, you know, a particular, you know, store for clothing, at this point, I probably know, without having gone in lately, what I'm looking for, how, you know, how they size their clothing and what the quality is. And so I'm pretty comfortable ordering what I know. And I think there's an interesting, provocative piece to this, which is how will that, if we end up really being shut down for longer, hopefully we won't have repeated shutdowns, but at some point the products are going to evolve beyond the shopper's knowledge of the products. And so how do we provide that information virtually to shoppers? And then the analogy in healthcare is, I'm pretty comfortable virtually getting care from we certainly know from our surveys that it's our patients are pretty comfortable getting it from doctors who know them. That's their first preference. And if not, a clinician who's associated with a doctor who knows them. And then kind of lagging is, I'll talk to just any clinician. You know, so again, there's that familiarity that creates a sense of, someone very early on said, you know, it was important to, you know, have safety and feel comfortable. And I think that applies to bricks and mortar experience and online.
So I think this is a good point to move into our next poll about how are people deciding where to get their routine healthcare and treatment.
Kira, is this the poll, the which of these is the most important to you? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, sorry.
There is a very loud truck outside my window.
We can't hear it.
Okay.
We can't hear it. You're good.
It's interesting. We get a little bit of polling fatigue as well. We started out at like 90% and now we're at 70%.
Oh. People are tired. They're like, I'm opinioned out.
I can't press a button.
I don't know what else to tell you.
Okay. All right. So we're at 77%. So I'm going to end it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then on that note, did you mention that we're going to have a break coming up soon?
I did not, but we will have a break coming up very soon.
All right, I'm going to share the results.
So brand that you know and trust is the most important deciding factor, followed by reviews, ratings, recommendations. I think that's interesting, for Cedars and Hogue that have such well-developed and well-defined brands that people recognize and know and love. But then also, Nancy and Allison, in your work, and particularly Allison, as you're looking to, place certain organizations within your properties, how we know that these things are important to users. How important are these things to our clients and businesses?
I guess I'm not surprised at all by that poll response, because I think it ties directly to what Marie Claire was just saying, is if there's sort of a brand of clothing that you already know is of good quality and you know the size, and it's very easy to order that online. I mean, if you want to explore something new, you want to go in person and get to know it in an intimate way. And so it doesn't surprise me at all that that would apply to healthcare. I think the question you might be asking is, how do we consider, like, as a retail developer, sort of how do we view the brand and quality of the healthcare provider as they might come in to our developments? And it's extremely important in the same way as, the restaurant operators and the grocery stores and the apparel stores. I mean, part of brick and mortar retail being successful is, convenience is very important, location is very important, but the customer experience, that environment that we're creating, we want them to, feel comfortable. And we also find that if our community feels invested in the shopping center, if they feel that that shopping center is a part of their community, they're more likely to come back to our center versus our competing centers. And personally, or not personally, but at Regency, we view that sort of in the design, but also in the merchandising mix, and the two go very hand in hand. And so we are always wanting to partner with the best in class operators, no matter who the user is. So that would be the same from the healthcare standpoint too, is if in that region we have a good understanding of, who's best in class and, how, well known and successful, and what customer are they bringing in, and what is their space going to look like? Does the design of that healthcare space sort of make our space better and tie to our, tie to the larger retail environment and make it more inviting for the customer?
I guess I would just say, yeah, obviously we would absolutely love the best in class tenant to come to our building. And I think anytime we are developing, we take into consideration, it's critically important, the location, where we're designing the space, and the community that we're designing for. Especially in healthcare, we rely heavily on the design team, especially the newest, the latest and greatest. What's really, really important in kind of encapsulating the consumer experience, the patient experience with the building, and making it convenient overall, and really designing something that is state of the art and that's phenomenal and that people want to be. So I think, again, as it relates to retail, yeah, if we're looking for a space, we need to design, we need to know that we're going to design that can support the Whole Foods that we want to go into there, or the fitness center that we want to go in there. And we need to understand, look ahead in the future, what we expect is going to be important for tenants in the future. And again, prior to the COVID, techtainment is our number one. I'm going to go back to office, and I have that benefit, and I think it really does play with healthcare as well. Techtainment in Los Angeles is our biggest tenant, and they require something completely out of the park, because we were at a point where you're really trying to, you really want to be able to attract the best employee. And by attracting the best employee, you have to provide these amazing benefits and these amazing locations and this amazing work environment. And it's how you as a developer can design your building and where you locate it and the type of retail that you incorporate within that building. And again, if there is a benefit that we can add, going back to designing for a community, if we can bring in a tenant that then also wants to partner with a healthcare system, so they're providing that convenience for their employees, I do think that that's going to go a long way. And I see that being quite a bit of our future.
And, I think it would be wonderful to hear from Jennifer, because, I think showing up as a clinic, with a clinic space that we all know and love in a retail environment is one thing, but I know that, not just Hogue, but Kaiser Permanente, Cedars-Sinai are looking at different ways that they can integrate and show up with installations and engagement points in retail environments. Jennifer, do you want to talk a little bit about what Hogue is doing?
Yeah, sure. I think so. From a retail perspective, we actually Hogue, because we're in Orange County and we're expanding a lot of our outpatient facilities still. We work a lot with the Irvine Company. And I don't know if many of you are familiar, but the Irvine Company is all about nailing down that shopping retail experience. And the journey for the consumer from beginning to end has to sort of be, well defined. They even also have standards in their facilities as well that, they want us to be consistent with their standards as well. And so it's a learning curve for us as well, right? Sometimes there are certain things in a healthcare environment that may not necessarily translate to a retail setting. So for example, even keeping your front windows all exposed when, a traditional box retailer, you have a narrow footprint with very limited storefront. Those front windows tend to become also borderline to exam rooms, and you want to keep those natural daylight exposed, but you want to give them privacy too. So there's multiple elements that we're trying to be respectful of with the retail centers while still trying to make our space, I don't want to use the word cool, but cool, and, resonating with the community just because, I love what Marie Claire said about, being contextual with the community. That I think is what sets us all apart as brand differentiators, is that we're connecting with the community in the design that we're developing because it's contextual to what is relevant in that area. And, besides the community, we're also incorporating and making sure we're doing research on what the industry best practices are and trends are, so that when consumers do decide to come to the brick and mortar location, they're not just walking into a traditional clinic. You have to walk into an environment that feels like it's not healthcare, that you are really maybe potentially stepping into a spa or, an innovative environment that you feel that you can trust them in delivering the care. And so I think that's something that as we continue to learn, as we open more facilities, we'll, journey more on, the design with all our architectural partners on what that really looks like. I think with COVID, it's hard to really tell what the lasting impact on facilities are. And since I think there's quite a few things that, normally we would have moved forward on at a high aggressive pace, that everyone's sort of taking the moment to say, let's pause for a second, let's wait, let's see how things sort of play out so that we make sure that going forth, we're not wasting our resources or spending our resources in an unwise way, and see how telehealth and everything plays out so that we can make sure that we right size and scale the brick and mortar locations to offer truly what consumers need. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think this is a good time to have a little bit of a break before we move into envisioning the future of healthcare and the retailization of healthcare. So we're going to pause, 5-minute bio break. If you want to grab another coffee, pop to the loo. It's down the hall on the right. Now's the time. Be sure to hurry back. Let's say, well, I can't calculate. 9:38 by my clock. See you soon. Oh, and make sure you do come back, because don't forget, we've got prizes at the end. All right. See
What
you
a
in a
way to
minute.
surprise people.
Hey, Sarah, we had one more poll. I don't know if we just want to pop it up just to see what responses we get. Or
Oh,
did I miss it? Was it the, oh, Corinne's gone. Never mind. I think it was, which one was it?
it was the convenience
Oh yeah, did we do that one already?
factor one. felt like it had been touched on.
Okay, so we'll just skip that one then. Okay.
The loo. I'm going to the loo.
Two-minute warning. It feels very weird just shouting that to a computer screen in an empty room.
You're not alone.
If you can hear me, there's 2 minutes left.
We're not visually there, but we're hearing you. You're
I've heard
in my
you all
ear.
the way from the bathroom, Sarah.
What did you say? Oh, it's 8:38. I don't know why I'm singing everything now. I think my drip coffee is kicking in. Also, the message from my mug, which says, I do what I want. So maybe some questions. All right. We'll give everyone the full 38th minute. When the clock strikes 39, we will get this show back on the road. Can you hear the dinosaur child?
Just a little bit.
Yes.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Just a little bit. I was like, what dancer will make you feel better?
Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. It's totally understandable in this day and age.
To be honest, I'm shocked he hasn't shown up in here yet. And relieved, so relieved.
You know, it makes it funnier when your kids do show up.
Yeah.
He probably would come in here with his enormous great white shark and be like, it's a megalodon.
And you're a good mother for not locking him in the bathroom.
Yes.
I looked him out there with his father, so
Dad's on babysitting duty.
Well, he's on parenting duty. But yeah. All right. Well, the clock has just struck 40 actually. So let's get moving. I see Jennifer. I see Nancy. I see Mary Claire. I see Allison. Welcome back, ladies, and welcome back, other purposeful friends. So let's move into our final segment of the discussion, envisioning the future. The future being, what does accessible care look like, and the further integration of retail and healthcare. And you know, we touched on earlier, I think it was Jennifer, or perhaps it was Nancy. Sorry, I can't read what I wrote down. But we were talking about, you know, how boomers wanted to receive care in one way. They prefer in-person visits. It was Nancy, came back to me. You know, millennials really prefer telehealth, and I think it's interesting because millennials are like, must keep working, can't take a vacation. So the virtual care approach really makes sense in that regard. And then, you know, looking at Gen Z, starting to also want more of a personal touch with their healthcare and the other brands and organizations that they interact with. And I think in a lot of ways we think about things as an evolution, the evolution of healthcare. Where is it going to? But it's striking me more and more as maybe it is more of a cycle. Maybe we are seeing more of a boomerang effect. And is this an evolution, or is it something of a going back to the way things once were? You know, we're talking about in-home healthcare. Well, is that not a house call from a doctor from the olden days? So I think that's something interesting to keep in mind as we envision or re-envision what the future of care might be. And at the heart of Purposeful, after all, is a desire to really jumpstart the way we're thinking about the future of healthcare design. And hopefully the discussion thus far has really stimulated some new ideas or helped you to think about some old ideas that may become new again about care and convenience. And as I mentioned, we'd love for this next segment to be led by you, our audience. So in a concise phrase or simple sentence, this is not the time for your next thesis or soliloquy. We'd love for you to toss out there a wild or crazy idea for our panelists that might have some game-changing consequences or, you know, thought-provoking ideas and results as the retailization of healthcare progresses. So while you get typing in the comment section or raise your hand, let's hit up another quick poll. How important to you is face-to-face contact for the future of healthcare services? And then we'll have another quick follow-on poll as well, which I don't know if that pops up after we get the results from the first one or if they can be, we can have dueling polls. But the next one is going to be looking at moving forward, what percentage of healthcare do you think will be provided through virtual contact?
So there's separate polls, but I'll launch this one now. We're almost at 80%.
Okay.
I mean, I'll end this one and share it.
So the majority of people feel that it's okay if my care is about equal parts virtual and in person. And I think that this just shows some consistency along the way with our discussion today. You know, we saw that kind of leveling out from during the pandemic and post-pandemic of the way people are receiving and are interested in receiving care, doing their shopping. You know, we've been talking a lot about an omni-channel approach to healthcare delivery. So just seeing that, I think, reflected in feedback from our audience is really interesting. And there goes the second poll. So Jennifer, what do you feel? Do you feel like this is all laddering up to everything you've been thinking this whole time?
You know, I want to say that it's nice to have the poll going simultaneously just to sort of help us gut check what our assumptions have been, right? That's why I love these interactive platforms, even if it's not in person, to sort of hear what other people are thinking. And I think in light of what we're seeing with the polls, you know, reaching that balance of 50-50 going forth, or maybe it's not necessarily an equal 50-50 split, but, you know, the perception that you have choice in how you manage your care plan, whether in a retail setting or at home or in a hospital setting, you can choose how you interact with your provider, unless they summon you in, is very essential to, you know, how we deliver care in the future. And I would ask that all architects, engineers, and designers really think about that as you sort of think about, you know, designing the future of spaces being beyond just your traditional brick and mortar four walls. It's all about technology integration. It's all about, you know, creating the right environment where the moment you arrive, which has changed now, right? The concept of waiting areas and waiting to be seen by your doctor has changed too. So that really changes how, you know, the footprint of the environment is really going to be built out as well, because now you can suddenly allocate more space to clinical care and telehealth consultation spaces in the rear, potentially, whereas, you know, apps can help with how patients wait, how they're seen. It's going to be very interesting, I think, but I think finding that balance together with all different sectors is going to help drive what healthcare is going to look like in the next 10 years, even in 5 years. So, yeah.
Allison, in retail environments and mall environments, are you, you know, with this omni-channel approach in mind and having seen what you've seen in, you know, with grocery stores and acknowledging that it is going to be a blend of in-person and virtual interaction. And here we see the results that 11% to 50% of healthcare, that is a huge swath of percentages. We're basically saying it's going to go either way. Will be provided through virtual contact, but Allison, you know, when it comes to who you're looking at in terms of tenants and knowing what you know with the mix and the blend between virtual and in-person with retail, are you working with healthcare providers and other tenants to analyze how much space they really will need? Are those conversations that are starting to come up, whereas usually we'd need, you know, this many square feet of your mall environment, but where, you know, with this uptick in telehealth, we feel like we're not going to need that much in-person space anymore, or is it staying kind of the same?
Definitely not staying the same from what we've seen. There's definitely been a shift towards tenants needing less space than they needed previously. I think a lot of that is due to, you know, with the omni-channel integration and the online ordering and order online, pick up in store, the tenants are constantly evaluating what their true needs are for stock on site. If you think about floor area and sales area, I don't know how much that's necessarily changing in actual size, but it's kind of that back of house space where things previously used to all be stored. I think that creates challenges though, because you find, you know, we kind of touched on earlier, people will go online, research what they want. We hear that Gen Z thinks that Amazon next day actually often takes too long. They want to go find it today at the store today. And so the challenge becomes, well, what store actually has what they want? I personally just experienced that trying to find a life vest for my daughter, and it, you know, out of 10 Vicks, only one had 2 that, you know, that I could go pick up today. So I think there's definitely a balance there, and space is directly tied to logistics, and we aren't necessarily helping with the analysis of their particular needs, but what we're seeing is them coming to us with different demands. Some of the specific challenges that's created for us that I think ties to healthcare is actually existing space. What do we do with an existing 60,000 foot grocery store that really only needs to be 30 to 40,000 feet? And what do you do with that remaining 20,000 feet to best utilize your real estate? That becomes the challenge. What types of uses want to take that back of house, you know, that doesn't face the parking lot or isn't accessible to the customer, or we can't turn it into a, you know, a logistics sort of storage space because tenants don't want that, right? The brick and mortar tenants don't want the online delivery services to have pickup spots at our location because they view that as taking, you know, services away from their particular brick and mortar location. So it's certainly been a topic of conversation for a while and will continue to be moving forward. And I'd be curious if Nancy's seeing some of the same, you know, issues and you guys designing new space.
It over to her. So yeah, Nancy.
It's interesting. I'm working currently on a construction project right now that next door is the County of Los Angeles, and they have not shut down. And because they haven't shut down, it's a complete change in the way that they think. As compared to, I would say, all of the news, as Mary Claire had pointed out, what everyone is looking at as it relates to the future of office, the future of healthcare, the future of retail. The second people get back into the office and the second that people get back into their environment, 90% of the things that people are concerned about today are going to go away. And I think we talked about this maybe in our pre-panels that, you know, 9/11 New York, a long period of time, nobody wanted to work in the higher penthouse levels and the higher office levels because they were afraid. But give or take a couple of years and that fear went away. There will be some changes to, I think, how we see office, how we see healthcare, how we see retail. And yes, the mall of yesterday, the mall of the 80s and 90s, I don't think that's really something that people anticipate is going to continue, but that was going away prior to COVID. And I keep writing all these different notes that, you know, there are going to be some shifts as it relates to the convenience factor. And I think it's important that we do start integrating convenience and no waiting rooms or very small waiting rooms because you can see your physician very quickly. And do we need to go to the doctor for every single visit, or can we combine the combination of going to our physician and then getting follow-up healthcare calls? You know, the other thing is wellness, that we've all been talking about preventative health and how do we incorporate wellness. And I think that this is going to be one of the changing dynamics in the future of any development and any design that we incorporate is wellness. And how are we designing a building that's safe from a health standard? Which is interesting to me because I think as designers, you all see what you've already incorporated into your building, but we forget that the tenants, the employees, they don't understand what it is that you've already added. And education is one of the biggest components that designers can really provide to the future. Here's the existing buildings that we have. What are the really important design elements that we need to include so people feel safe and so people understand that this is the right place to go and this is a comfortable place to go? And then how do we further elevate that by creating some wellness amenities? Do we create walking paths? Do we create areas where we can go to yoga and we can have coffee so that like the mental awareness is there, and that we're really tying in that whole wellness factor and helping people understand it's more than just, I don't feel well, I need to go to a physician. It's, we need to take care of this from day one. So yes, offices right now, healthcare right now, they're trying to figure out where the ball's gonna land. The second we get back into our real world day-to-day environment, it's going to change. And I say that because, again, working on a construction site with over 200 employees, and I'm also sharing it with a building that's fully occupied, people forget very, very quickly. And the whole, oh gosh, there's only 2 people in an elevator at any given time. Try tell that to the people who are working and who are waiting for the elevator. They forget the second they're standing in the elevator lobby. So it's up to us. It's up to us to educate. It's up to us to really design what we can for the building, but also then let tenants know what's out there, because we cannot control then what will happen when those tenants, when the users, when the customers come to the site.
I think if I could follow up on that, on one thing you brought up that I think is really important, is we had an active construction site that got completely shut down pre-COVID, and we're still shut down because we're sort of waiting to evaluate where to spend resources based on how tenants are going to come out of this pandemic. In the process of everything being shut down, we're sort of actively reevaluating our design and being challenged with what would you change in light of COVID. And I think the biggest challenge will be to find the balance of implementing new, maybe some new design standards or new ways that spaces will work, but without overly reacting to what in the long term is really a short-term situation. I think if we overreact to what's going to be the next 18 months to 2 years, we could be handcuffing ourselves for the long run of when consumer behaviors do go back to the way they were before, like Nancy just mentioned.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in here as well. This is such an interesting conversation. I think some of the notes I was making is that the science of this particular pandemic is going to drive design in a way that I don't think has ever happened before. So we do continue to hope that there's this post-COVID world that we're going to return to. The science today does not indicate that yet, right? And so if we end up with a vaccine that is more effective than the flu vaccine, which is about 50 to 60% effective, and it's an annual vaccine, if we end up with a vaccine with a higher efficacy rate, and there's a prolonged immunity once someone has had COVID, then we might actually experience a post-COVID world. If those two things don't happen, we're going to continue to live in a world of prevention, social distancing, masking, and I think that's going to drive design in ways that we're not even able to visualize yet. So if we think about, we've had lots of projects over the last 10 years at Cedars-Sinai where we've been very interested in, I certainly have been very interested in bringing light and air into the clinical environment, because that signals a comfort that we haven't had in historical physician offices. Those aspects might actually become clinically necessary if we learn more about air conditioning systems and how the virus, we don't yet really know how the virus travels. And so it might not be a nice to have amenity to create a more welcoming, softer, cooler environment, to use Jennifer's word, but it might actually be clinically essential. And then you have to pair that up with, my mind immediately goes to, oh my gosh, what's the cost of that? And in healthcare, where we have very slim margins and our capital investments are rigorously examined, that balance is really going to become quite important. And then the other note I made was, I think there's a concept I've been spending a lot of time thinking about is how do we, and I think Nancy, you were touching on this, how do we make safety or cleanliness visible? So for all our lives before COVID, we have gone to a physician's office and assumed that it was clean. And certainly we look to see kind of what the signals are. And if an office is disheveled, then presumably we go elsewhere, right? But even when an office is immaculate, and all the visible signals are there, that doesn't mean it's safe from exposure to COVID or all the other infectious diseases you can get from coming into a clinical environment. So I don't think in healthcare, that intersection between healthcare and design, I think we might want to spend more time thinking about what are the ways we signal it to patients and explicitly tell patients without putting a bunch of signs up, which is what we do today. Nobody reads them. Even if they read them, they wouldn't understand them. So I think that's also a new frontier to help to kind of circle back to a topic at the beginning of our session to help educate patients as to what are they actually consuming from us when they come to us for healthcare.
So Mary Claire, I'm going to jump into a couple of things. One, as it relates to design, you're 100% correct. But I think it's so fascinating. And we're a national company, so I'm speaking with different states. California is so rigorous with our requirements and our green building requirements and the design that we already, have to design to, that most of the things that we think we need to implement, we have already implemented. And again, this does go back to design though. If you design it from the get-go, and if you're starting with that mindset, it really doesn't add a lot of cost, but you have to start there. If you're going back and you're changing and you're trying to redo something, that's where the cost impacts really come in. And it is really important that you start with that criteria. And then I think you had touched upon the giving education, comfort. And, I came to my building at MLK right around when COVID started and everything shut down. And just having my temperature taken and someone check me in, I felt 10 degrees more comfortable walking in because I knew that they were following certain protocols. So it's creating little things, as you had said, that people just feel comfortable. They feel that you've taken that extra step.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good segue into one of our audience questions. So question from Brandon Guzman. He says, in my experience, retail developers have asked for retail architects to design healthcare clinics in their retail centers. Do they see that providers are now starting to request firms that specialize in healthcare design, and are developers changing the mindset on this? I think that Nancy, that's probably a good one for you.
I would never, yes, I would possibly reach out to a retail designer for certain elements of how I am providing the placemaking, which is that amazing term, and to really make sure it's an inviting environment. But when it comes to me designing a healthcare space, you need to rely on healthcare designers because there's so much that goes into it. And it's really critical that you are thinking about what's important not only to that space, but to the provider that will eventually go into that space. So while I may ask for certain elements from retail designers, 100% need healthcare designers on board.
I think I would answer it a little differently from a retail standpoint. Is oftentimes we seek out architects who have hospitality experience to bring that hospitality approach into the placemaking aspect of retail, and more of an overlap there. Just as an example of how I think just because we're doing retail, we're not always going to retail specific architects. I say that, and one of my favorite architects is actually on this call, so know that she's actually really great at bringing that hospitality and placemaking thought to our designs every day.
Allison, it's funny that you say that because you're not looking only for just retail-centric architects, just like healthcare is no longer looking for just healthcare architects. At least at Hogan, I don't know if Cedars is the same way. The partners that we tend to sort of stick with or use recurringly have demonstrated that they can sort of pull from different sectors to build the new healthcare platform, so a retail, commercial, and having that strength in that is important, because being a healthcare architect but knowing only how to just check the box and fulfill the requirements doesn't really cut it anymore. You have to have that cohesive, holistic experience also built into it too. So that's why retail architects and commercial architects are so important to the line of work that we're doing as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think our favorite partners, I would describe exactly the same way. They bring together healthcare and the experience piece. I also think there are areas of expertise around inpatient healthcare design and outpatient, and they're quite different. The guidelines are quite different. There's more latitude on the outpatient side that we certainly want to take advantage of. And so I think I regard it being foundational that the architects we work with have an understanding of that complexity, and then we get to the really, fun part of the work together.
You know, Mary, I'm also quite curious too. I mean, for us, the foundation too for all our architectural partners is you have to have a research component background also tied to it, because without that research component, when you're designing things, you're never really fully pushing the envelope or understanding, maybe there's certain parts of the wheel you don't have to reinvent. And so that's why we think that's very important too. I think another key factor with our partners too is cost. To Mary Claire's point, cost is such a huge factor right now. And in light of the pandemic, every sector has been hit, but healthcare has also been equally hit. It's not that we're still, doing great during this pandemic because people are unfortunately getting ill, but, our ROI and everything has been impacted. So how our designers creatively utilize our financial resources to make the most impact at a low cost, and the longevity of that, what is being implemented is really core in the design thinking that has to be part of the process. And to your point, we don't know enough about COVID yet to be able to properly have a magic 8-ball that says this is exactly what we have to do going forth. I mean, there's even talk about some folks potentially having an innate immunity to COVID, right? So those things are not really tested, and I'm curious to see too, from a retail standpoint and everything else, everyone's got masks on, so flu season might be impacted because everyone's wearing masks. Maybe we have a lower volume of flu.
I think the interesting point that you raised there is a good move into another one of our audience questions about envisioning the future of healthcare. And we have a recommendation or request. I want a booth in my strip mall where I can hop in, get my blood drawn, have my odd mole photographed in high resolution, get my sore wrist imaged, and then it all gets sent out to the appropriate providers for follow-up, and I'll be out of there in 5 or 10 minutes. Ostensibly assuming that you wouldn't necessarily interact with a certain person, you just would, I guess, go in and press a few buttons. I need an x-ray, a door opens, you put your arm in. The vending machine of doctor visits. What do you think about that sort of thing, Mary Claire? Is that something that CEDARS is already developing?
Well, I do think it's a very futuristic vision at this point in time, but I think there's lots of smart people trying to figure these things out. And I think the vision in my mind may not be, I want to go to a booth in a strip mall. It might even be beyond that. I want actual technology in my home that pairs up with my electronic medical record that my clinician looks at. And, so certainly a step along the way might be that kind of, booth mentality, kind of vision. And I think we see pharmacies that are trying to expand their offerings and have kind of quick walk-in touch points that are faster than a typical urgent care. So there's this continuum of services. You can go to an urgent care and get taken care of, without an appointment, and probably quicker than going to your primary care doctor. And then you could have a booth where, in a pharmacy where you can pick up your prescription at the same time and get some of those services done. Is the end game really, could more of that move to the home environment? And again, I don't think that this is driven by the pandemic at all. I think healthcare was on this evolutionary track. And when we think about how physicians, just to use one example, how they work with patients with hypertension, you have a blood pressure cuff at home, and you take your measurements and you report them back. And in some cases, that's an electronic transfer of information. So I think there's a great hope around when would you actually have to leave your home to go see your physician. Many of those things that we have to leave our home for right now could take place in, in the comfort of our own environment.
So I think now's a good time to open up the Q&A. Doesn't just have to be future focused. If there are any other questions or topics that have come to mind for you, our fantastic audience, over the course of this discussion, now's the time. Type away, unleash your questions.
I think there was a really good discussion going on in the chat about how do we reach or provide care to some of the more disadvantaged communities or those areas that don't have access to technology or necessarily have a car where they can hop into.
Yeah, I did at one point make a note about that. I think a lot of our conversation around the mix of modalities, we're not always remembering that there are portions of the population who have zero access to these to this functionality, and we have a responsibility in healthcare to stay connected with those patients, and we care about all facets of the population. So it gets back to Jennifer's first point around kind of having a really diversified set of offerings for all of the patients who are coming with different needs and different capabilities to connect with us in certain ways.
To a certain extent, I think that's where incorporating healthcare within retail is going to make it more accessible. Because I think what the issue is, again, just the lack of knowledge that preventative healthcare is critically important. And I know that you guys deal with that on a day-to-day basis, that a lot of the issues really stem to people just don't know that they should be going to the doctor and be getting a yearly check-in and asking questions that they just don't feel right. And if there is a way that we can make that more inviting for that, the society or the group of people that just choose not to go to the doctor. And I think retail could really provide that benefit.
We all know about product positioning and how if you come up with something new, you want to put it where everyone can see it so that they become familiar with it. And I think that's part of the challenge of getting those services where they belong is to put them out there where people can see them and not just, assume that they'll be discovered by people on their own.
Somebody in the chat, actually, I believe it was Gary, actually, who brought about putting these components along the path of travel. So even in the less accessible areas that may have, less access to technology, they still have to usually exit the home to, deal with laundry, shop for groceries. So if we can sort of strategically place our, facilities or clinics or pop-ups along this path of travel, it really helps improve, the visibility to healthcare and also gives opportunities for education as well. I think the biggest thing that's still missing, though, is also infrastructure. It's just that the truth is a lot of these more rural settings don't quite have all the technology and infrastructure set up in those environments. So even if you try to incorporate telehealth, their Wi-Fi is horrible. You have broken connections. You don't feel like you're receiving comprehensive care. So, the key thing is making your consumers and patients feel heard and then trying to figure out how to reintegrate that into their care. That's the best way from a retailization standpoint, design standpoint, everything standpoint to, deliver everything that we're doing. I'd also want to say that community-wise too, cultural sensitivity. I think a lot of the stigma with healthcare is also associated with healthcare is cultural too, because there's the predominant thought that if you're, being Asian myself, the elderly generation is always deterring from actually going into the healthcare facilities and going to see the doctor because it may be either perceived as weakness or, they don't want the generations to worry, or even just religious reasons too. There's a ton of reasons from a cultural setting, religious settings that we also have to be mindful of when we're delivering healthcare and retail onto multiple platforms, especially now when it's becoming more and more accessible.
Yeah, and we really haven't talked about even gender differences. So if we think about integrating healthcare into most retail settings, we are going to be accessing a lot of women. Women are shopping. They're buying the groceries, they are shopping for other products, and the men are not. And so there was it reminded me of a really interesting study that was done around trying to reach the male African-American population around issues related to hypertension. And the concept was, could we embed some of those services in barbershops? Because that's, you got to your point, where do people go? And should we put services where people go? Is there a way to reach people in that way?
I think that's a great point, and that's a great idea. I know for me personally, I have family members who are they come from a place of enormous fear when it comes to their health and seeking health care. And they're terrified of going to the doctor because they don't want to find out something. Like they'd rather not know. They don't want to hear bad news. They, fear of needles and all of the things you can think of, all of those exist in multiple members of my family. But, part of making healthcare more accessible, putting it along people's routes, putting checkup locations inside barbershops, what that also does is it helps to normalize, the seeking out of healthcare. It shows people will be able to see day to day, oh, there's someone that looks like me. There's someone that's totally healthy going to the doctor's office. They seem happy, they seem fine. It's things like that, seeing what other people are doing, seeing their behaviors and having it just become normalized as part of their everyday is going to also help make it more comfortable for people those decisions themselves instead of waiting until their body is literally at a breaking point.
Yeah, and it gets back to, there's no new ideas, but that's how medicine started, actually, was in barbershops. And, early surgery, barbers did early surgery. I know it's a kind of crazy to think about.
They were dentists too.
Right, that is part of the history. And I think the fear you're talking about really comes from, we've segregated ourselves from the care, and we've segregated ourselves from end-of-life issues. And that creates this, it's very difficult to educate the public when we actually have no interaction until we have to have the interaction.
Yeah, what's important is the element of trust. And for some people, it's trusting that the place you go into is going to be cleaned and sanitized. And for other people, it's not that important. It's more that they're dealing with somebody that's a member of a group that they're comfortable with, and that they don't feel, like they're in another world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Gary, I think to your point, it's like, this is really sort of a calling for all of us right now, right? All the partners that are on this phone call right now. It's that there is an opportunity really here to shape behaviors. As architects and designers, you have a way of building things that really drive behavioral actions and thinking and how people respond to things. And so these are things that can help us manage the perception of the patient on feeling safe, feeling like they're receiving quality. It is truly sort of all integrated from a thinking standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we're getting close to the end of our discussion today. So, I think that the conversation has been fantastic so far, and I can hear everyone agreeing with me. So we'd love to just take a few moments and allow our panelists to each make some final remarks. So, in short, what do you feel is the most important thing for AEC professionals to work towards and to keep in mind as we continue on the pursuit for accessible healthcare and the shared future of retail and healthcare. Alison, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I today have learned a lot, even myself, about the intersection of retail and healthcare. And I think the thing that stands out the most to me is the idea that it's our customer at the core of our business, and knowing who our customer is and creating a connection with them, developing that relationship with them. You know, in healthcare, I think that can be on a much more personal, intimate level with your providers, but in retail, a lot of times, you know, that, like I said earlier, it's in merchandising, but it's also in design. And I think the ability to design an environment and a space that people feel that there's not a lot of friction to get in and out. They feel very welcome. It feels very accessible. It's inviting. It's a place that they want to come back to again and again. Is extremely important to the success of retail. Paired with information sharing, I think, and educating the customer and getting that education out there so it's better integrated with the services being provided. So, you know, I think we all have a lot to learn. And I think that COVID for retail has certainly accelerated a lot of trends that we were already seeing that we're having to respond to a lot more quickly. But I really do have high hopes that we will be able to respond. And I also actually think that this idea of like coming back to where we all started is, I personally feel it was already trending that way, that, you know, Gen Zs are coming back to malls, and but at the same time, I think COVID is starting to accelerate that too, because we're really starting to see kind of our consumer and customer true needs and reactions, and, you know, in more immediacy than we may have seen before.
Great. Jennifer?
Sorry, I took myself off mute. I think for me, I want to just say that the human aspect is the most critical thing in everything that we do, right? And so what the AAC team can really take away too is that as we move forward, that we make sure that we're still, even with technology, what is too much technology, right? We have to make sure that when we're designing these future spaces and integrating it, that it feels supernatural, and that it's actually helping our clinical providers and our patients feel like they're getting the best kind of care possible versus feeling like technology is a hindrance. So I just want to be thoughtful that it's not just us plugging facilities with a bunch of new technology and hoping that it will work and synchronize on the back end. There has to be some sort of seamless thought process built into it, workflow, and, you know, it just has to really fit the whole spectrum of care to never take away from the one-on-one interaction that a clinical provider will have with their patient. Yeah.
Thank you. Mary Claire, I see you nodding vigorously. Please share your closing thoughts.
I guess I would, some of the themes that I'm really thinking about and taking notes on is, so why did we bring this particular forum together? Why are we talking about retail and healthcare together? And I think one piece is we're both invested in creating environments that inspire people to want to come to us. And I think beyond that, we're invested in creating environments where people want to stay. So it's not just a one-time visit. These are relationships that we have in retail. When retail succeeds, these are relationships that can be generational. Brands can be generationally kind of regarded. And I think the same thing applies to healthcare. So it's a really interesting conversation. It's also a really, it points up some key differences in healthcare. So one of the things I've always felt about kind of the healthcare experience is it's particularly hard because we have people coming to see us that do not fit any one profile. Yeah, and they often don't even know why they're coming to see us until we tell them why they're there, and until we figure out why they're there. To the point of, you know, I think Jennifer brought up this point, they don't want to come see us. So we have different barriers. So when you think about retail, there's a pleasure to it. Maybe not so much for men. I'm generalizing here, but, you know, forgive me. But there's a pleasure to it that is missing. That's a missing element in healthcare. So that has to be replaced by a comfort. a feeling of safety. And so I think that's a really interesting connection. And the last point I would make is, I think it's important for designers and for and builders and healthcare practitioners to envision a world that actually is not necessarily going to be post-COVID at all. So we may end up emerging from this pandemic into a better place. We all hope so, but I think we're pretty sure at this point from the science that this is not the last pandemic we're going to have. So whatever we build together, whatever we design together, I think we need to be designing for that future as well, so that there's a flexibility, there's a resilience to the designs that we have. We flipped everything upside down in all of our sites. I'm sure you did as well at Hogue. And we need to be able to continue to do that.
Thank you. And Nancy? So, agreeing with Mary Claire as it relates to designing for the post-COVID, but also recognizing where we are today. And it is very, important to recognize the design elements that we have already incorporated into our building without getting too crazy, but providing that level of education for the consumers so that they understand, I think, all of the hard work that everyone really does put in behind their design. What's so phenomenal about bringing healthcare to retail and bringing healthcare to the future of retail is that, again, it just provides an inviting environment for all of the patients. And everyone keeps talking, maybe we can do a kiosk, we can have our x-ray, maybe I get an x-ray and then I go have lunch and then I wait for the doctor to come meet me at the table, or I can go back to the doctor's office and they can tell me that I broke my wrist, or, hopefully not. But there are so many elements that will help healthcare as we move forward and help, I think, again, create this wellness factor that's really important. And I think the most important thing that's coming out of this is just creating a society that's much healthier and much better off. And that that's ready for the next COVID, ready for the next pandemic that we may have to face. But I think, again, it's just the whole dynamic, the whole world of retail, the whole world of office, the whole world of healthcare is changing. And I think the more we all look at it, the more it's all merging together and how we can create just an environment that will really support all of those elements. And again, you guys are you're the most important person in this whole issue right now, because you know everything that's critical that's going into the design. You are educated on all of the design elements that are required. And I think a lot of people do rely on you. And it is interesting to me how little people really understand. So providing that level of education is a huge step. Thank you so much, Nancy, Allison, Jennifer, Mary Claire. It really gives me great pain. Maybe it's heartburn. I'm not sure. I should have a virtual visit after this to wrap up the conversation today. I know just me, myself, I have so many other questions and thoughts that have come to mind before this discussion took place, that came up during this discussion. I know that everyone else probably feels the same way. We could go all day with breaks, of course, but we can't go all day. So we're gonna wrap it up here. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you so much to all of you in our audience for joining us in the discussion rooms, for the very active conversation in the chat room, and for participating in this Q&A. I'm gonna hand it off now to Corinne and the Healthcare Committee. We're gonna find out who those winners are of the prizes. Oh my God. And I know there's also going to be some other bits and pieces of important information that you'll definitely want to stay tuned for. So that's it from me. Over and out. Have a great day. Here comes your committee.
Okay, I guess I'll get started with the winners since people are still here. And I hope you're still here. I just double checked. This was slightly random, slightly based off of who was on first today and who signed up for this event first. So first, our first gift card goes to Alanush. And please unmute yourself and say hi. Are you still here?
Hi, yes.
Hi. Yay, I have your email, so you'll be getting a gift card from.
Oh my God, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Corinne, how much, real quick, what is the gift card, or how much is it?
It's $25, and the committee is still deciding on where that's from.
All these students.
Thank you.
Yes, and you can stay right there, because Hafu Wu is you get one too. So you're number 2. Number 3 is Than Eddington. Dan, are you here?
I am, thank you. That sounds great.
Yay. And then finally, who was the last one? It's going to, I think he's still on here, Phil Compton. Phil, are you still on here?
Yeah, thank you very much, Corinne. Awesome.
Yay!
Everybody, appreciate it.
And that's it. Very exciting. Thanks for sticking with us. We had like 90 people almost the whole time. That's amazing. All right, so then let's, Eric and Humvee.
Great. Well, Corinne, thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Sarah. You know, this is the second time we're doing this, and I don't know what we're gonna do, you know, without your silky, sassy Australian accent. I mean, you know, keeping us tantalized throughout the whole thing. I think, you know, so entertaining, and thank you so much for really, you know, putting that good energy in there. So congratulations, gift card winners, and thank you everybody for sticking with us to the end. You know, I think we really learned a lot. Panelists, thank you so much. I'd like to just also take a little time to just by name, thank you to the big sponsors, because you're so generous. This is a virtual conference, and again, to sponsor this kind of event, it's very generous of you. So a friend, real quick, friend of Purposeful, Reevely Engineers, Clayton Birmingham, Craig Wilkinson, Jessica Chappelle, and Julie Attic. Thank you so much. Also a friend of Purposeful is Air Treatment Corporation, Dan Davitt. Thank you for your generosity. And then our big presenting sponsor, Con and Building Company, who I, again, you know, came on early before we knew this was going to be virtual. So Brendan Riddle, Gonzalo de Vera, Jessica Wen Skunas, Josh Bremer, Ryan Hill, and Nicholas Lutz. Thank you, Con and Building, for sponsoring. Again, thank you, panelists, and a special shout out to G Chang of Cedars. You know, G really led the charge here, pulled together a great panel, and you know, kept us motivated and focused. So G, thank you so much. Really, it's
thank you, Gia.
I'm done without the committee, so thanks everyone.
And I'll just one quick announcement from my co-chair Hanvi Chen of HOK.
Thanks, Eric. And thank you to the panelists. That was so engaging. We sat through a lot of webinars for different associations, but it was really great to have this interactive. So hopefully the audience, let us know what you think in the chat. I see a lot of great thank yous and feedback coming up, so I appreciate it. So we just want to let you all know that our next event, it will be in September. It's going to be a joint committee, the AIA Pasadena Foothill chapter. They are putting on an event with HDR and Cedars-Sinai, and it's for a new hospital for Cedars at Marina Del Rey. So we all know that they've got a new hospital coming out there. It'd be great to kind of see some more project work in the books. So we're happy to collaborate with Pasadena Foothill. We will be sending out a flyer, so all of you guys on our list will be receiving the instructions on how to register for that. I believe it is free. It's on September 24th in the evening. I think the program starts at 5 o'clock. So get that in your calendars. Look for the flyer. And before we end this, I just want to ask the panelists and Sarah and our committee to stay on. We need to wrap this up. So so everybody else, once they leave, you guys stay on. So
more prizes
for you guys.
And a real quick, and thank you for the people from out of town. That's the silver lining about doing Zoom. You know, we miss being in person and networking in person, but this allows folks from, I think there's some folks from Texas and Washington State, in the Bay Area, and you know, so thank you so much.
Utah. All right.
for joining us from out of town.
And the students too. So thank you guys. We're glad you could participate.
Yes.
It's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, the committee.
Yeah, thanks to all of you who attended.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.